Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus, here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It's the end of the week, Friday, the 23rd of November 2018. Let's have a look at what's leading into the weekend coverage and start with a message from the Spanish Prime Minister. Came through late last night on Twitter, effectively saying, Spanish Prime Minister, of course, Pedro Sanchez, vowing to vote Brexit down if the withdrawal agreement is not rewritten before this weekend's big summit. Now, he said last night that he and Theresa May, the Prime Minister, remain far away on the issue of Gibraltar, and this is really at the heart of his concern over the future relationship withdrawal agreement papers, and also what he wants changed and what he wants subject to renegotiation. Now, the reality of this, though, you might see on these headlines, as you can see here, Spanish PM threatens to Brexit veto over Gibraltar. He can't actually veto anything this weekend. That's because on this draft future relationship paper is works on qualified majority in the European Council, which means that not everyone has to agree to it, but the majority under those voting rules. So Spain looks, in this case, to be relatively isolated. Not many other EU leaders, in fact, I don't think any I've seen, have supported his position, say, yes, we will also give a Brexit veto against this future relationship paper and withdrawal agreement if if we don't see any progress made on these. However, there is a massive but to that, and that is, whilst Spain might not have the ability to vote down the future relationship paper now, because it's simply a draft, it's a proposition, it's non-legally binding, it will have the ability to veto, as any other member state would, to veto any future trade deal between the UK and the EU. And so what this has been reported on by some newswires is that this from Spain is basically an indication that the issue of Gibraltar will be a significant issue that they will be raising and making sure will be part of the negotiations when it comes to the nitty-gritty of negotiating that future trade relationship after March 2019 and during that transition implementation period as planned. So it effectively laying down the conditions of Spain's support of that future trade deal. Now, that's very difficult because, of course, the UK have made it clear that there's no movement on the issue of Gibraltar. There's been suggestions from the Spanish political side that there's the issue of shared sovereignty and discussing, through bilateral negotiations, the issue of Gibraltar and whether there can be any form of shared sovereignty there. Been flat out rejected by the UK, not going to entertain that idea, not going to engage in those negotiations at all. Spain can veto that future trade deal, and so it's a question of how far Spain will go as to vote down the whole of that trade deal and what the outcome of that would be in the context of these EU-UK negotiations on that future relationship. Treasury Minister Mel Stride said yesterday on Newsnight, we are not going to compromise on the sovereignty issue around Gibraltar. So this is a story maybe which is making headlines now, not necessarily going to make any difference now, but certainly is an indication of the big political debate that will happen in terms of that EU-UK trade deal during the transition period, if all goes to plan. And that is a big if, because as we know, there are a significant amount of vulnerabilities to Theresa May's Brexit plan at the moment. If we have a look at the next story, the question of a no deal is very much on the minds of many political commentators, news reporters, and indeed politicians, as well as the general public as well at the moment. Why? Because it's becoming increasingly clear that the Prime Minister's proposal in terms of the withdrawal agreement of the UK leaving the EU, but also this future relationship, what the EU-UK relationship is going to look like post-Brexit, is not very well supported in Westminster, to the extent that the Prime Minister is not probably, from recent figures, going to be able to get this through the House of Commons and actually get it through into legislation. Now, that opens the possibility that if you cannot get the support in your own parliament for the negotiated leaving terms of Brexit, is there a possibility that there is going to be a no-deal Brexit? Now, someone who's just come back to Cabinet, Amber Rudd, the new Work and Pensions Secretary, made headlines yesterday by effectively saying that Parliament would not allow a no-deal Brexit to actually happen. Now, let's just sort of go through this a little bit. Everyone hates, but not everyone hates the deal, but a lot of politicians do not like Theresa May's deal. More than 88 Tory MPs, including Boris Johnson, one end of the spectrum, to Anna Soubry, other end of the spectrum, have declared they will vote against this deal when it comes to Parliament. However, Amber Rudd in the interview said, I do also feel, having spent the past 6 or 7 months on the backbenches talking to various other backbenchers, that Parliament will stop a no deal. Now, this whole idea is that, okay, when it gets to the vote and MPs have to choose the possibility of a no-deal Brexit by voting down the current deal, that they, by actually saying, this deal is not good enough, I'm willing to entertain the possibility that by voting down this deal, there might be a no-deal scenario, a number of MPs, possibly a majority of MPs, will say, you know what, actually, I cannot let the possibility of a no-deal happen. It would be too catastrophic for me, and therefore I'm going to have to vote with the government. Even though it's not a deal that I agree with, even though it's not a deal that I support or think is the best negotiation, it's a deal that I have to vote for because I cannot allow the worst case scenario in my eyes, the Brexit no-deal scenario, to actually come true. Now, there is a question of whether, even if this doesn't happen a first time, there is a question of, let's say the negotiated deal is brought back to the Commons for a second time, to try again for a second time with perhaps a couple of compromises, whether MPs would say, actually, second time round, you know what, if I vote against it, if the Commons votes against it a second time round, in reality, that could really trigger a no-deal scenario. I have to vote with the government this time because I cannot, on my conscience, allow a no-deal Brexit to happen. Why is this important? Well, for a cabinet minister to say this, it is very important because the Prime Minister's line, as she said yesterday, is that there's a clear choice for MPs in the Commons. She said, we can choose to leave with a no deal, we can risk no Brexit at all, or we can choose to unite and support the best deal that can be negotiated, this deal. So the Prime Minister's line is, look, if you don't vote for this, you are opening up the possibility of a no deal. A no deal is a likely outcome. Amber Rudd's basically saying no deal's never going to happen, Parliament is never going to support it. There is a contradiction there, which many commentators and indeed Newslines picked up on. And indeed, so did Sir Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, saying, after these comments from Amber Rudd, it's time for the government to drop the false choice between a bad deal and a no deal and to come forward with a plan that can command the majority support of Parliament. Now, obviously, the options in terms of what's going on, no deal is an option, I suppose. Many would say it would ruin the Conservative Party for leading the negotiations poorly, causing the no deal scenario to happen. There's, of course, no Brexit. Prime Minister said no Brexit is not going to happen while she's Prime Minister. So either Jeremy Corbyn becomes Prime Minister and says we're going to have a second referendum. That's unlikely, given that actually a lot of the votes he got at the last general election was on the basis of Labour making clear that they would support, or rather promising to deliver Brexit, or that Prime Minister is replaced by another Conservative MP who would back a second referendum. What's the likelihood of a Conservative MP actually putting their position for a leadership bid as backing a second referendum and getting the support from the Conservative Party? Very unlikely. So the options there, really, really difficult situation. Nonetheless, this is something to look out for in terms of this no-deal scenario. Of course, going into that meaningful vote that will happen, reports so far, early December. One more story then. This is, of course, actually looking at what the future relationship paper, which was published yesterday, did indicate. There's been a big backlash on several fronts. Let's just talk through this. The Prime Minister said, of course, that the public wanted Brexit settled. But the key line, top line summary of this whole story is that the compromises made in this future relationship paper do not satisfy the opinion in the Commons that the withdrawal agreement and the future relationship is not a good deal for Britain. And that is the summary. Dominic Raab, the former Brexit secretary, said, while confirming he didn't want the UK to stay in the EU, said, if you just presented me with the terms, this deal or EU membership, because we would effectively be bound by the same rules without control or a voice over them, then yes, this would be even worse than that. And by that he means staying in the EU. Now, the concerns are basically it's not legally binding, which means that, as one MP said yesterday, it's just a wish list. The future relationship has no grounding to force any party to commit to anything in the actual reality of the negotiation. So it is just, in effect, words of intent. There's nothing to commit anyone to actually fulfilling them. Jeremy Corbyn obviously saying yesterday it's 26 pages of waffle, indicating that there's a willingness surrounding a lot of the terms of the future relationship. In terms of the backstop, Boris Johnson's made clear he wants to remove mention of the backstop. DUP saying it will vote against the Prime Minister unless it renegotiates any mention of the backstop in the withdrawal agreement and also the future relationship paper. Key issue as well, particularly for Conservatives and Conservative MPs north of the border in Scotland, is fisheries. Now, the future relationship paper says we should cooperate on access to waters and quota shares within the context of an overall economic partnership. Now, what Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP, First Minister of Scotland, said this has predicted that the industry would be used as a bargaining chip in the negotiations, and the future relationship paper pretty much indicates that. Ross Thompson, Conservative MP, said the agreement was unacceptable as it meant sovereignty over our waters would be sacrificed for a trade deal. However, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation has given the document a cautious welcome, so that's something you should know and consider as well. But either way, this future relationship paper, the key thing you need to know is that it's done little to satisfy the concerns of many Conservative MPs, both Remain and Leave, that the UK is going to be getting a good, secure future relationship from the EU that would satisfy their, or rather overlay their concerns regarding the legally binding withdrawal agreement going forwards. That's pretty much it for the end of this week. You're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter right here. I'll be on Twitter at RJHW if you want to tweet me any of your questions or comments. And of course, the comment section is below if you want to chat about any of the stories I've covered today or indeed something that I've missed out. But apart from that, I'll be back again on Monday bringing you the latest over what's happened on the weekend and also leading into the political agenda next week. See you then.